Hi, Nagashri ma'am. Good evening. Nagashri ma'am, am I audible?
Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. We can hear you. Yes.
Thank you. Good evening.
We'll start. Good evening, ma'am.
Yeah,
We'll
right.
start at 6.
Yes, absolutely. Not a problem. Okay, thank you.
I've downloaded the PPT, so I'll share it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. Other students will start the session. We have requested the participants to join the session through a WhatsApp group. So they'll join. Meantime, whoever is here, can you please turn on your camera? We'll take a group with. Request the participants on the front page. We just have 2 more of us here who turn on camera. I know it's difficult Saturday at home. Yes, thank you. Am I audible?
Yes,
Thank
yes, you are.
Thank you. Thank you. On behalf of Department of Language, Culture and Society, College of Engineering and Technology, SRMIST Katankalatu, in collaboration with Department of Linguistics, Tetso College, Dimapur, Nagaland, we are organizing the 6-day online faculty development program on narratives of change. Narratives of Change, Reimagining English Language and Literature as a Mirror of Cultural and Intellectual Transformation, NEP 2020 and Viksit Bharat 2047. Here we have with us our speaker, Dr. Debashri Datatre, who is a professor from the Department of Comparative Literature at Jadavpur University. She is here with us to deliver her insights on Where Fire Speaks, Indigenous Knowledge and Narratives of Change. I just have, there's so much to talk about Professor Datatre. She has served as a coordinator she serves as a coordinator of the Center for Canadian Studies at the university. In 2025, she was elected as International Fellow by the York Environmental Sustainability Institute at the University of York, United Kingdom. Her previous international recognitions include the Fulbright Alumni Award 2019, the Shastri Mobility Program at McGill University, the CCOPS Fellowship at the University of Pavia, the Fulbright Fellow Visiting Lecturer Fellowship at the University of California, Berkeley, the Erasmus Mundus Europe Asia Fellowship at the University of Amsterdam, and the Fulbright Doctoral Fellowship at the University of New York, Stony Brook. Her research spans environmental humanities, indigenous studies, comparative literature, and digital humanities. Apart from this, she has also authored several books like the author of Oral Traditions of the Northeast, a case study of Harvey oral traditions. And she's also a co-editor of several volumes, including At the Crossroads of Literature and Culture, Following Folkhead Paths, Discussions on Narrative, Eco-Criticism and Environment, Rethinking Literature and Culture, Literature and the Other Arts, and Finding Philosophers in Global Fiction. She is also in several editorial boards like Lit and Indian Response to Literature, Langoonscapes, the Venice Journal of Environmental Studies, and Environment, Senses and Emotions. She is also the series editor for Environmental Humanities and Indigeneity, published by Peter Lang. Professor Datatre is a nominated representative of Jadavpur University on the India's Members Council of the Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute. She is also an external associate at the Robust Center for Canadian Studies, York University, and currently serves as the zonal representative for the Association for Common Literature and Language Studies in India. So, Ma'am, platform is all yours now. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I would request somebody to start the PowerPoint and we'll begin with the discussion. Yeah. Thank you. If we could go to the first slide, please. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you. It's a pleasure. I thank particularly Dr. S. Ramya for inviting me and all the organizers at SNMIST for the kind honor. We begin with this particular, I would be speaking on Australian bushfire literatures, and one of the reasons that I'm going to speak about it is trying to build up a connection of why I would like to speak about it, particularly for an FDP that focuses on NEP 2020 and Viksit Bharat. So NEP 2020 is phenomenal in a way because it integrates IKS, Indigenous Knowledge Systems, and environmental literacy through literature. How is this possible? India's NEP 2020 marks a paradigm shift in education. It emphasizes experiential learning, holistic development, multilingualism, and the integration of indigenous knowledge systems across subjects. The policy advocates environmental education grounded in traditional ecological wisdom and global sustainability practices. Australian bushfire literature provides an excellent thematic module for the NEP 2020 classroom, particularly if you try to think about smart classrooms, if you think about also the large focus on environmental sustainability that many modules of NEP 2020 has. Australian bushfire literature provides an excellent thematic because one, it demonstrates how indigenous knowledge contributes to climate resilience. It develops critical thinking about colonialism, environment, and culture. It helps to teach students to value traditional ecological knowledge alongside modern science. And it encourages comparative study between Indian and Australian indigenous traditional knowledge systems, promoting global citizenship. If you look at it, and by reading narratives where the fire speaks, Indian students perhaps would better understand how their own forests, grasslands, mountains, and agricultural systems also speak through indigenous ecological indicators, particularly if you look into ancient Indian knowledge systems, from the subaltern forest communities of central India to Himalayan agroecological knowledge. The next slide, please. Viksit Bharat 2047. In a way, some of the key words over here are sustainability, culture, and literary imagination. The vision of, if you look into, okay, I forgot this was there. So one of the things that I spoke about right now is, of course, looking at ecological knowledge and NEP 2020. Just move on to the next slide, please. Yeah. So if you're looking at Viksit Bharat 2047, the vision of Viksit Bharat, a developed India, stresses environmental sustainability, cultural richness, and scientific advancement. Literature plays a crucial role in shaping the consciousness required for such a future. Bushfire narratives rooted in indigenous knowledge offer key lessons for Viksit Bharat. One, it calls for sustainability that requires respecting traditional ecological knowledge. Just as Australia looks to Aboriginal fire practices, which we'll come up to eventually, India can revive local practices such as community forest councils, sacred groves, water harvesting traditions, and indigenous agricultural cycles. Cultural identity and environmental stewardship are interconnected. Fire practices in Australia and India reveal that environmental ethics cannot be separated from cultural worldviews. Modern development, and which is why an FDP of this nature is important, must dialogue with tradition, not erase it. Literature helps students imagine development that is not extractive but regenerative. Thus, Australian bushfire literature becomes a global case study in how indigenous knowledge can shape national futures. The next slide, please. Yeah. So, what we are looking at it is the idea of fire becoming not just fire is not just an element that we all recognize, but we're looking at fire as a cultural teacher. So, what do I mean by this? What is it that I'm looking for? Fire has always been more than a natural element. It is a cultural agent, a storyteller, and a teacher. In Australian literature, bushfires have come to symbolize both catastrophe and renewal, drawing attention to deep environmental histories and the enduring wisdom embedded in Indigenous knowledge systems, or IKS. So, a title where we say When the Fire Speaks captures a powerful idea that landscapes are not silent, they contain voices, histories, and ways of knowing that are communicated through natural cycles such as burning, regeneration, and renewal. In the context of literature in English, bushfire narratives become windows through which readers can examine the intersection of ecological crisis, colonial history, and indigenous philosophies. The National Education Policy of India strongly emphasizes on holistic education, environmental responsibility, multicultural learning, and the integration of IKS into the curricula. Literature, likewise, the national vision of Viksit Bharat 2047 stresses sustainability, inclusivity, and cultural rootedness. These frameworks invite parallels between Australian Indigenous fire knowledge and the diverse Indigenous epistemologies of India, encouraging students to learn from global and local practices that promote ecological balance. So, what we are trying to do is we are trying to position Australian bushfire literature within a broader pedagogical and cultural conversation. It illustrates how Indigenous fire knowledge transforms narratives of disaster into narratives of continuity, and how literature can play a pivotal role in building environmentally conscious and culturally aware learners aligned with the ideas and ideals of NEP 2020 and Viksit Bharat. The next slide, please. Yeah. So, what we are looking at is Indigenous knowledge systems are holistic frameworks. They are grounded in relationships between humans and land, humans and non human beings, and the past and the future. In Indigenous Australian epistemologies, country is animate, alive with memory, consciousness, and spirit. Fire is one of the many ways that the country speaks. It shapes land, renews ecosystems, and communicates the need for balance. Indigenous Australian fire knowledge, particularly cool burning practices, has been refined over tens and thousands of years. These practices involve low intensity, carefully timed burns that clear underbush, foster biodiversity, and prevent large scale catastrophic fires. Unlike Western approaches that often treat fire as a threat requiring suppression, indigenous methods view fire as a steward of regeneration. Fire is a partner, not an adversary. And that's where probably the Indian context comes in. This philosophical orientation deeply informs literature in English that draws upon indigenous worldviews. Writers portray fire not solely as a destructive force, but as a cultural narrator, linking past, present, and future. Such writing resists colonial narratives that depict nature as passive and humans as dominant. Instead of emphasizing reciprocity, interconnectedness, and long term ecological memory. The next slide, please. If you're looking at it, one of the questions that you have to ask is how do communities recover after fire destroys food, sacred sites, and ancestral ecologies? COVID-19 overshadowed the trauma of 2019-2020 Australian Bushfires, and as Professor Liz Cameron says, belong to the Dharuk community. Land is part of our being, an extension of self. The UNEP Indigenous Knowledge says that is its key to preventing biodiversity collapse. One of the questions that you would ask is, how do you support people forever attached to a landscape after an inferno tears through their homelands, decimating native food sources, burning through ancient scarred trees, and destroying ancestral and totemic plants and animals? The disastrous and traumatic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic pushed back the horror of one of the worst bushfires in Australia in 2019-20. Indigenous Knowledge's Professor Liz Cameron, a Dharug woman and leader in Aboriginal land and country awareness with a PhD in Aboriginal studies, elaborates on the symbiotic relation with the land for Indigenous communities. She writes, you have part of it on your slides, land is part of our being. Aboriginal cultural and understanding of our connection of country are perceived as an extension of self rather than a Western perspective that separates land, water, and all living things. However, as the world continues to confront one disaster after another, this is an important juncture to remind ourselves of the crucial role of Indigenous knowledge systems towards environmental sustainability. Biodiversity loss and climate change, in addition to sustainable resource management, are driving natural spaces around the world from forests to rivers to savannas to breaking point, says Siham Drissi, manager of the Biodiversity and Land Management Program at the United National Environmental Program, or UNEP. She writes, we absolutely must protect, preserve, and promote the traditional knowledge, customary sustainable use, and expertise of indigenous communities if we are to end the damage we are causing and ultimately save ourselves. The next slide, please. Yeah. If you look at these images, these are some of the images from the bushfires that took place in 2020 in Australia. Please continue with the next slide. Yeah. The next slide. And the next slide. Yeah. If you look at this, it says something very significant here. It says, I hope it will recover. I hope that indigenous knowledge and expertise takes precedence in the forward management of natural environments. This requires indigenous people and systems leading the process, not being tacked on, or our knowledge is exerted and propped into failing models. The next one. This was something that came out right after COVID-19. I mean, it was this January 2020 particularly. It's a particular grief to lose forever what connects you to a place in the landscape. Our ancestors felt it, our elders felt it, and now we are feeling it all over again. As we watch how the mistreatment and neglect of our land and waters for generations, and the pig-headed foolishness of coal-obsessed climate change denialists turn everything and everyone to ash. The next slide. So if you look at this, these are certain practices by indigenous knowledge holders in Australia trying to work with bushfires. And this is also something that has been storied. It is part of a very alive relation and a very alive system of existence. The next slide, please. In much Australian literature, bushfires appear as dramatic events that expose human vulnerability and environmental fragility. Works by non-Indigenous authors frequently emphasize themes of loss, fear, and unpredictability. These stories reflect settler anxieties about a landscape they never fully understood. One made volatile by the suppression of indigenous burning practices and the intensification of climate change. However, indigenous writers offer profoundly different narratives. Text by Alexei Wright, Tara June Finch, Melissa Lukashenko are important because they reframe fire, not. There are other slides, I think, in between. Yeah, you need to go back. Yeah. 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 That's what I was wondering. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. The next one, please. Yeah. And so what you're looking at is these are very profound texts that we will look at by Alexei White, Tara June Finch, and Melissa. The reason that we are looking at these particular authors are important. I'll begin with the first one. If you go to the next slide, which shows Tara June Finch, sorry, Alexei White. Is it there? Right. Why are these authors important and why are their stories important? The first thing that's important over here is, the first thing that's important over here is the idea of truth telling, confronting the real history of colonization, dispossession, and resistance. There's no sugarcoating over here. You're also trying to understand contemporary indigenous perspectives over here in the case of Australia, and trying, which is vital to grasp current issues of reconciliation, treaty, systemic injustice, and cultural survival. What is also important over here is the idea of cultural richness, experiencing diverse cosmologies, connections to country, kingship systems, and ways of knowing that enrich everyone. You're also looking at future thinking. Indigenous knowledge systems hold profound insights into sustainability, community, and resilience, crucial for navigating the challenges of 2025 and beyond, climate change, for instance. And the sheer literary brilliance of these authors, because these authors are masters of their craft, they push boundaries, innovating with language, and telling unforgettable stories. The first writer over here on your slide is Alexis Wright. Who is she? She's a visionary weaver. She's a member of the Wani Nation from the southern highlands of the Gulf of Carpentaria, one of Australia's most acclaimed and influential writers. She's a winner of the Miles Franklin Literary Award for Carpentaria and Praiseworthy 2023, one of the few authors to win it twice. Known for epic, sprawling novels that blend myth, reality, and fierce political commentary, her writing is demanding but incredibly rewarding. What she does is that she doesn't just write stories, she builds worlds steeped in Aboriginal law, country, and the ongoing struggles against colonial power, and most importantly for our session today, environmental destruction. She is known for her uncompromising sovereignty. Her work, in fact, is a powerful assertion of indigenous sovereignty, challenging readers to rethink concepts of nationhood, ownership, and belonging. This is crucial because treaty discussions are gaining momentum as you and I speak. Her books are known for environmental prophecy. Books like the Swan Book tackles climate change and resource extraction with terrifying precision long before it became mainstream. She's also known for her literary innovation. She stretches the novel form, incorporating oral storytelling techniques, multiple perspectives, and a deep sense of time that connects past, present, and future. She forces you to read differently. Alexis Wright has an enduring relevance. You should catch up on her interviews that are available freely online because she has an enduring relevance. Her decades long career shows a consistent engagement with the most critical issues facing Indigenous people and the nation. Her voice grows vital every day. The next author that you want to look at is Tara June Finch. Tara June Finch is a lyrical story truth teller. She's of Wiradjuri English and Afghan heritage. She burst onto the scene with her debut Swallow the Air, winning multiple awards. Her novel The Yield, whose picture that you see over here, I hope you can see it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, if you look at the picture over there, The Yield is probably one of the most important novels that she has written. Published in 2019, it swept the Miles Franklin Literary Award, the Prime Minister's Literary Award for Fiction, the NSW Premier Literary Award Book of the Year, a phenomenal achievement. She's known for her poetic prose, deep exploration of identity, trauma, and the profound importance of language. Why must we read her today? One of the most important things is that, for example, the eel is a powerful testament to the fight to preserve and revitalize indigenous languages, which, as you would understand, is embedded in the landscape. The and it becomes a particular central character in the text as well, where you look at language as culture, as history, and resistance. She is known also for thinking about intergenerational trauma and healing. She navigates the complexities of trauma passed down through families and communities with nuance and compassion, exploring pathways towards healing. The connection to country. Her writing also has a very great spiritual and deep connection to Virajuri land, even when characters are far away. It's a visceral reminder of what's at stake. One of the reasons, the next person that you need to look at is Melissa Lukashenko. Melissa Lukashenko is a fierce and also humorous chronicler. She is of Bunda Jalung and European heritage, known for her sharp wit, unflinching social commentary, and powerful portrayals of contemporary Aboriginal life, particularly in southeast Queensland and the northern NSW. She is the winner of the Miles Franklin Literary Award for Too Much Lip in 2018. Her writing tackles themes of sovereignty, land rights, family dynamics, and the ongoing impacts of colonization, and humor and rage. Steam Pigs is one of the is her debut novel. If you could take a look at it, yeah, she's known. I mean, she's somebody whose characters are very complex, flawed, and utterly real. Her stories crackle with energy and demand engagement. Contemporary realism is something that she's very good at. She captures the nitty-gritty realities of modern indigenous life, navigating bureaucracy, fighting for country, dealing with family drama, and also building connections amidst struggle. She's also known for sovereignty in actions. Her characters often embody everyday acts of sovereignty, asserting connection to land, challenging racist assumptions, and maintaining cultural practices. She is also known for a sharp social commentary. Through biting humor and keen observation, she dissects issues like racism, poverty, environmental destruction, and the justice system. Her insights are crucial for understanding Australia today. Women are also at the heart of many of her stories, resilient, resourceful, and refusing to be silenced. Her novel, Steam Pigs, explores issues of identity and belonging. If you move on to the next slide, please. Yeah. The next two slides will give you instances of how indigenous knowledge systems have tried to contain bushfires in Australia and trying to work with processes of healing. One of them, as you would realize, is walking with a cool fire, which is an indigenous fire management practice. The second slide, if you look at the second slide, is patch burning in the Midlands region of Tasmania. The technique draws on traditional Aboriginal knowledge and can help in modern fire management. The third slide is also very important. It's an organization called Fire Sticks Alliance, which is a collaboration between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people to try to bring in the process of cultural burning, as you would see in the description. All right. If you move on to the next slide, which is Badugili. Badugili is this, as you would realize, is on the sales of the Sydney Opera House. Now, this was an important point because Badugili in many ways is Actually, it's a reflection of indigenous worldviews, indigenous traditions. It is also something that was done during this period to honor indigenous art, indigenous connection to environment and sustainability, which I think makes it a very important structure. The next slide, please. Yeah. So what we are looking at is that bushfire literature, therefore, becomes a site where multiple transformations occur. First, there is ecological change. Catastrophic fires amplified by climate change underscore the consequences of disregarding indigenous ecological knowledge. Literary narratives highlight how indigenous fire management, which we just saw, can mitigate these disasters, emphasizing the urgent need for environmental re education. Second is the idea of cultural change. Indigenous voices are increasingly recognized as vital contributors to national identity. Literature becomes a platform for reclaiming suppressed stories and challenging colonial myths. The next is narrative change. English language storytelling shifts away from Western linearity, embracing indigenous temporalities that emphasizes cycles, continuity, and the relational ethics between people and land. This transformation aligns strongly with the pedagogical aims of NEP 2020 and Viksit Bharat, both of which support culturally rooted, environmentally aware, and multidisciplinary approaches to knowledge. If you look at the recent uh, knowledge bodies of who have, for example, ICSSR and others, where you have these certain award systems that are focusing on indigenous knowledge systems, which is focusing also on vulnerable communities, and that gives you an idea of what is happening. The next slide, please. So one of the, I think there's one before. Let me just check. Yeah. Okay. Next one. All right. So the vision. Okay. It's all right. So the vision of Viksit Bharat stresses environmental sustainability, cultural richness. And this is where you will find a collaboration between traditional wisdom and modern science. Bushfire literature will offer us models of community led ecological care, deep respect for land, regenerative development pathways. It helps students to imagine eco conscious futures for India. In the particular context of India and the university system or the education system, it also helps us to understand academic social responsibility in a larger scale, in a more multi-dimensional manner. The next slide, please. So, when fire speaks, what we are looking at, when fire speaks, literature functions as an ecological teacher, where at its core, the idea of fire speaking is a metaphor for listening to land, to ancestors, to suppressed histories, and to ecological wisdom. Literature makes this listening possible. Through story, poem, and novel, writers translate indigenous philosophies into English in ways that maintain their depth and spirit. Fire speaks when 1. A forest regenerates after a cool burn. 1. A child learns an ancestral word that encodes ecological knowledge. A community rebuilds not through fear but through renewed understanding of country. In literature, fire becomes a language of transformation, one that challenges modern societies to reconsider how they inhabit the world. It is a possibility of trying to also look at the interface of ecology, culture, and history and project pathways of future resilience. The moment I use ecology, culture, and history, what I'm essentially doing is I'm inviting a process of interdisciplinarity. As you would realize from NEP 2020 or Viksit Bharat, the large focus has been on interdisciplinarity between the humanities, the social sciences, the engineering faculties, and interdisciplinary studies as well. So that becomes a larger focus of our project. The next slide, please. Yeah. If you're trying to link bushfire literature to NEP 2020, what you're looking at is India's you're looking at a process which encourages comparison between Australian Aboriginal fire knowledge and Indian indigenous ecological practices. It's also important that you're trying to build global citizenship and environmental ethics. It is important that if you look at projects of ICSSR and others, the Indian Council of Social Science Research and others, you will find that one of the things that you require is a clearance from an ethics committee. And one of the reasons is that you're trying to look at research that is academically, socially responsible. You're trying to also engage with a form or tradition that insists on a particular way of knowing. So it reinforces NEP's vision of integrated, culturally rooted education. If you move on to the next slide, please. Yeah. So what you're looking at is bushfire literature that reveals the fire as a storyteller and as a healer. So in the intersection between Australian bushfires, indigenous knowledge system, and literature in English lies a profound lesson for global education. Fire, as these narratives show, is not merely a destructive force, but a storyteller, a keeper of ecological balance, and a catalyst for cultural renewal. The NEP 2020's emphasis on integrated holistic education and Viksit Bharat's vision of a sustainable, culturally grounded nation aligns seamlessly with the insights found in such literature. By studying when fire speaks through the wisdom of indigenous communities and the power of literary imagination, students and societies learn to listen differently. They learn to recognize that the land carries knowledge, that culture and ecology are inseparable, and that narratives of change must be rooted in respect for traditional wisdom. In doing so, literature becomes not only a record of human experience, but a guide towards a more sustainable and inclusive future. If you go on to the next slide, please. Yeah. So this is, of course, but this is not where I would like to end particularly here. If you would stop this, there's a video that I want you all to look at, which gives you a sense of the connection of land and indigenous systems that work with Badugili. And if you give me a moment, I will bring that slide. I will share it with you all. Just give me a moment, please. If you could stop presenting this, I will. Is this visible to everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I'll put it in full screen. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, do we have volume for this song? Ma'am, I'm sorry. Devashri, ma'am. Devashri, ma'am. Can you hear us? Please unmute, ma'am. Ma'am, we are not able to hear the music. Is there a music behind? Because the subtitle says the music.
Oh, it's a narration actually. It's a
No, we were
narration.
not able to. We were not able to hear since the beginning. I was trying to call you over phone also, so.
Okay, no, that's all right. If you just see the video and see the action, that is fine, I think. It should not be a problem.
Oh,
The diamond etchings are the clan designs of the East. Through thousands of stories told over generations, we learn how to cultivate and process food as we travel through our summer and winter estates. The skin markings begin to transform as we move north with the flight of the heron. These birds seek refuge across the freshwater, wetlands, and river systems. These river systems make way for the Scilly, and the salt water and the four winds of the Torres Strait Islands are reviewed. For the artist they own Talladega, we see a view of Vardu Island. It's a place where dugong are playing in the ocean. But for the warriors, the rituals continue today. And it's about the hunt for their first dugong. They must catch the dugong and return to their families. They are now known as a man and have been handed the traditional practice to provide for their families in the future. As the birds migrate to the wetlands, the desert winds bring dust and with it rain and an abundance of food. As the bush tomato grows, the white sand of the riverbed fills at the same time. It also is a time that rains replenish the water table. Artist Patricia Ansel Dodds paints of the central Arunta landscape and what water means at a time for further travel across homelands. When the rains occur, you can travel because there is abundance. And so the gatherings for winning ceremonies begin, where knowledge is passed and exchanged. From desert country to northeast Arnhem Land, the songlines ensure age-old knowledge is told through the Rak or clan designs, representing both salt water and fire. Ashes from the fire are depicted in black. Jambuwa Marawili Ayed paints the water cycles of his people, their ancient homelands, the connection to land, and the sea territories, from the surface of the water to the seabed. In this water lies Baru, the crocodile. It's a totemic ancestor for Yolngu peoples, and they have a long relationship. When Baru comes to nest in the sacred place where salt and fresh water meet, he brings with him the fire, ensuring their cycle. The work is only painted onto barks, and the bark must be collected after the wet season rains. We need the waters to fall from the sky and flow across land and then meet the sea, passing through every landscape, every person, every plant, every creature, and every seasonal cycle. And then you know country is whole, and country is powerful. And as we see us in a small canoe, we are made aware of how vulnerable we are and how much we must listen and learn about them.
Thank you. I hope I'll share the video with people as well, so that if you've not been able to hear the audio, you can let me know. So it gives you a sense of the interconnection, and what is most important is the idea of indigenous protocol, which is based on indigenous knowledge system and is located within indigenous knowledge system. Given the large focus of NEP and Viksit Bharat on vulnerable communities, it becomes important to understand how these frameworks provide us a method of reading literature, method of understanding the world around us in terms of relationships between humans and land, humans and non-human beings, and the past and the future. And therefore, the country becomes a particularly animate one that is alive with memory, consciousness, and spirit. And fire is one of the many ways that shapes the way in which country speaks. It shapes lands, it shapes ecosystems, renews ecosystems, and communicates the need for balance. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
ma'am. That
Yeah.
enriching session was connected NEP, which Bharat, along with literature, especially indigenous literature. So I'm sure the topic itself gave you the crux to talk about or to connect with our nation's wish to be. So there's a question in the chat box, ma'am. Can I read it for you? People, the floor is open for questions if anyone wants to. There's one question. Can indigenous systems be called as little traditions?
Indigenous knowledge systems are traditions. If you're using the word little, first of all, thank you very much for the question. If you're using the word little, it becomes like, you're making it a comparison between a great tradition, which becomes perhaps, the indigenous knowledge system in a way is an entity of its own. So one really cannot really think about it in terms of little traditions, but traditions that are rooted in very ancient knowledge systems and therefore have a history of their own, and a history that follows a certain trajectory that is equally important, and that's also where NEP 2020 and Viksit Bharat makes changes, because they're trying to look at these traditions as part of our inclusive history, of our literary, cultural, and ecological history and memory. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
If that is okay for you, can you please send a message there to ma'am? There was another question, if I'm right. I heard someone talk. I'm sure there are research scholars who are working on environmental studies. So You can post your questions related to your area of research here. It's how not area of research questions, but I'm sure you'll be able to relate to the text which ma'am stated now, because you people are doing your research during the period where we talk about NEP and SDG and Viksit Bharat. I'm sure you'll be able to bring in that thread into your thesis too. So
I'm sending a link as well of the video so that people can hear it if they had trouble listening to it. I'm sorry about that. If there are any other questions or concerns, you're free to ask me. Also, perhaps if you look at a certain reading list, which I can provide to the organizers later on, you can take a look at those books, and also that might help you move forward.
yes, that would be a great help.
Yeah, if there are any other questions. It's difficult on Saturday. Yes, this Saturday evening is, thank you for being here on a Saturday evening. So that's always difficult.
I have a question, ma'am.
Yeah, please go ahead.
In what ways do you think this indigenous storytelling traditions can be incorporated? Because NEP 2020 talk about multidisciplinary, right? And so how can the storytelling traditions be incorporated into multidisciplinary or experiential learning models?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a
As
very
proposed
important
by
question. Yeah, and I'll also address the question that's come over here. The point is, the first thing that we need to realize is that we are looking at storytelling as story collaboration. So when you're looking at collaborations, you're looking perhaps one at the process of translation, which is also something that NEP focuses on. What you're also looking at is the idea of working, like, for example, at our university, we have people working together from literature, architecture, engineering, and the sciences coming together, trying to look at environmental sustainability and indigenous knowledge system, and trying to build parallel pathways. So that becomes very crucial. So that's a very important area of interdisciplinary intervention. And storytelling is just not storytelling. It's also connected to indigenous knowledge systems, and how indigenous knowledge systems can help us understand climate change and ecological disruption, and also how crucial it is to look at ecological memory of indigenous knowledge systems. For example, during COVID-19, when indigenous communities were most vulnerable, that is a point where their ecological memory came to their rescue. Yeah. And if you're looking at indigenous with reference to Indian women, if you, I would suggest that you look at works by Temsula Au. You could look at works by Isterin Kire. You could look at works by Mamang Dai. All of these are very important works in particular, particularly when you're looking at IKS in indigenous knowledge system. You could also look at works, you could also look at works by Mahashweta Devi, where you look at, Mahashweta Devi is not indigenous, but is a very powerful speaker for indigenous communities. So I think that's important. So these are things, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
There's a question you said there's a chat box. So
yeah, that's the question, I think, on the chat box, which is titles. That's the one I saw about some titles with indigenous. So all these writings by Temsula Au and others, and I can send the list to Dr. Ramya and the colleagues over
yes.
there. Right. If there are any other questions. Okay, so if you're trying to take this at the ESP classroom, what you would probably need to do is begin with, I would suggest looking at videos at the first point, which will help you understand how you're looking at particular communities. What would also be important is to look at, we had a workshop last week, in fact, last Saturday, where we were looking at indigenous knowledge systems from Philippines, from Mexico and from West Bengal, to name a few. And one of the things that we came across was precisely, and one of the things that they did was also to look into children's books on indigenous communities and indigenous knowledge systems, which thankfully is happening much here. So, which is how you would try to bring it. It's always important, and I think this is a very important question because it's actually, you're talking in terms of pedagogic practice. So if you're talking about pedagogic practice, then you would need to also have a visual element to it. And the visual element might make it simpler to have that transformation. I hope that answers your question.
Social elements. Any other question? I have one question. I don't know if that would be
Yeah.
a question. This is again related to linking NEP and Viksit Bharat.
Mhm.
NEP's equity goals and Viksit Bharat's mission of inclusive growth. How can these be adopted by institutions in order to ensure that the indigenous communities benefit from knowledge sharing? How can
Yeah.
these two, NEP's equity
Yeah.
and
So
Viksit Bharat's
yeah.
mission?
Yeah, that's a very vital question. I think there are one is, of course, there are projects that are happening at different points. Two is you also have all kinds of stakeholders. I can speak from Jadavpur University's case study, is that where we have both academic and non-academic stakeholders coming together under the NEP 2020 and Viksit Bharat goals. We've had major Viksit Bharat ICSSR projects happening in our university, which actually looks into this whole conglomeration of having indigenous communities and non-indigenous collaborators working together. So that also we have had workshops on this. We've also looked into quality assurance cells, that the internal quality assurance cells, or the IQAC as we all know, which tries to work with this particular community, which tries to work with a research operandi within the university system that also takes into cognizance NEP goals and Viksit Bharat goals. Also, what is also important is that if you think about NEP 2020 and Viksit Bharat, you cannot really think about either of these without inclusion of marginalized communities. That has been a very large focus. The other thing is with its very important focus on environmental sustainability. We all know that there's a course of basically on environmental sustainability and environmental change and climate action that all students need to take at the undergraduate level. What we also know that each department is able to shape that course according to its larger rationale, which helps us to build in this very unique interdisciplinary approach in our university system. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
You're talking about the Australian bushfire, right? Recent
Right.
years, Kerala is, of course, seeing the Wayanad,
Yes.
especially. I have an entire village, if I can say,
Yes.
is not to be seen now. Yes.
Yes.
So
Yes.
because of the landslide. So
Yeah.
there are scholars who are working on the trauma caused by the landslides in
Yeah.
Kerala, and of course, in North too. So they're trying to work on, as we're talking about, how the aftermath of the bushfire or the landslide, how they try to
Yeah.
recoup and get back to their life. They have to come out like phoenix. Yes. So
Hmm.
researchers are working on that too. I'm sure I'll share your mail ID with them. Maybe they also
Yes.
work on trauma and climate impact. So
Yes, that would be very useful, that conversation. And I'm glad you brought up the YNR case, because that is precisely a very important connection with India right now. Because you're looking at this, you're also looking at, I mean, we spoke in our workshop on Saturday with communities who belong to, let's say, Central India. So Central India indigenous communities, and which spoke about the idea of research within indigenous community systems. I think so that's very important. Thank you very much for that.
and this is one information to all. SRM has a center for Parivendra Tribal Center. If I'm right, Yansu?
Yes, ma'am. Center for
Yes.
Endangered Languages and yeah.
Can you come
Yes,
again with the
yes,
sentence?
yes, ma'am. Center for Endangered Languages.
Yes. So, yes, ma'am. Devashri ma'am, you can definitely come down to our department. And whoever is here from other college, you can be well because there's a team working on retrieving the indigenous languages. And they are very much
Very
dedicated with
important.
identifying the language of the Badaga community. I don't know if I can talk much because the stakeholders or the owners, I don't know if they are there. So I just will talk on one or two things which I know. They're talking about the Badaga community, the language, how their language is being is not seen or not in limelight. Through this revival, we should say, they're trying to bring it to life. So people who are working on indigenous languages, who want to touch upon the language of the people in Uti, the Badaga community, you are welcome. You can get in touch with the professors who are researching on survival of that particular language.
Yeah, and
More
yes, of
questions?
course. Yeah, I'm just saying that my email ID is available. So if anybody has questions, they are free to do it. Just give a reference to this FDP and I'll know then that this is what it is. So that's not a problem.
Yes. I will post that. I'll post your email ID to that in the WhatsApp group.
Yeah, absolutely. Not a problem.
Sure.
Thank you.
If there's any other question or if anyone wants to thank ma'am on the team's behalf.
Yeah, there's a one question from Muthu Lakshmi, I think. I'm working in
Yes,
trauma and climate change. Could you please brief me on how we can deal with climate emotions and how we can incorporate this in research? Okay, so first of all, this is a question that will require another 2 hours. The other thing is that, but it's a very important question. If you're dealing with climate emotions, there are two ways that you're looking at. I'm not very sure about the text that you're working with. If I'm aware of the text that you're working with, I would be more better informed to provide suggestions. But what I would ask you to look at, and that's something that I've told a PhD student of mine who's also working on climate change and speculative fiction, is that to locate your responses, because if you're speaking as a scholar from India, and if you're looking at climate change from India, it's going to be very different from how climate change is perceived in the West. The other thing that's also equally important is if you're looking at climate emotions, you're looking at a way of life or how you live the everyday. And how you live the everyday in India is very different from how you live the everyday in the West. So that's also a connection that you need to bring in. When Dr. Ramya was speaking about the Endangered Languages Center, one of the things that she said was very important for me when she said that, I don't think if I should speak about it because I'm not a stakeholder, I would ask stakeholders to speak. This is a consciousness that is needed in each and every researcher that you speak with, because that is precisely my point. Whenever I speak, I'm very careful about the fact that I'm a non-indigenous person speaking about indigenous communities and indigenous traditions. So at best, what I can do is I can create a collaboration of solidarity, but I really can't create a collaboration that involves appropriation or coercion. And I think that doesn't work. So when you're talking about climate emotions, the question that you need to ask is about the indigenous community. Are you looking at particular indigenous communities? Are you looking at certain marginalized communities? Are you looking at gendered notions of climate change, climate emotions? In the context of India, are you looking into caste issues? So these are all aspects that needs to be included within it. Also, how are you looking at it? There are one way of looking at it is a historical trajectory that you can build up. But the other is that if you're looking at climate emotions, you will also need to look into larger concerns of spatial humanities, of geopolitical spaces. And so that would be something that's important. I hope that answers your question, but like I said, this is a question that would involve 2 hours. So, but I hope that answers your question.
Yes,
Again,
so
I'll
we have
try
to
to
invite you for
find
our,
that the reading list. I'll keep in mind this when I'm making the reading list.
yes, yes. Thank you very much. So, anyone else? Any other question? So, can we wind up then? A few thumbs up will help us to understand that there are no questions. Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much for this note on how language, literature, even based on the question you had mentioned about how ESP can be taken to classrooms. Yes, ma'am. So how NEP 2020, Viksit Bharat 2047, language, literature, how all this can be combined and how this can be taken. But of course, a community effort where all of us have to come together in terms of reviving indigenous language, culture, inclusion, equity. So you have given us a very clear picture of how literature can definitely support us either in writing new literary forms or from the existing works, how, as the saying goes, literature mirrors life. So thank you so much for showing light on literature, language, NEP 2020 and Viksit Bharat 2047. So we are deeply honored for your presentation. And I'm sure if we would publish a paper based on this FDP, all your speakers' works, I'm sure we'll be able to take it ahead for the title as NEP and Language and Literature. So thank you very much, ma'am, for the session. On behalf of the entire team and SRM-IST and the Department of Linguistics, Tetso College, we are deeply grateful for this wonderful presentation. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much for spending a Saturday evening with me. Thank you very much,
Yes,
everyone.
thank you all participants.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Participants, feedback form is there in the
Chat box.
chat box. We had only 41 participants today. Want to, though we posted in the group. But still, now I'm sure people will be asking for feedback form in the WhatsApp group. We
Yes.
have to do that, though. Anyway, thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you
ma'am.
very much. And yesterday's same YouTube link session 2 I posted. The same thing is for 3 and 4 also. So there you'll be getting continuous live or the recorded versions of the YouTube. Thank you all. Thank you, Yansu. Bye.
Thank you, ma'am. Bye.